So I see another senior Labour person yesterday who says that he's been told, and this is somebody I've known for years and I trust, he's been told that Rachel Reeves was advised by the governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, that they would put interest rates up if they didn't.
What?
I know. I mean, obviously it's mad.
The
But this
Independent
is doing the rounds as a story that somehow Rachel Reeves was warned that if they didn't cut the universal entitlement to the fuel payment, that Bank of England would put up interest rates. Mad.
We're going to take people's questions today, aren't we? But before we do that, we've got to talk about all this kind of carry on with the winter fuel payment and the scrapping of it. Just to remind you all, this is that one-off tax-free payment that pensioners get it ranges from between £200 and £300, this one-off payment. It depends on your age. Over 11 million people get this until now. So now it's going to be means tested. It takes it down to something like 1.5 million people who'll get it. And it takes the bill down, doesn't it? It takes how much the government are paying out on their welfare bill. It'll save them £1.4 billion. But it's been a massive carry on, this, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we have talked about this before. And I mean, I do think this is the first serious unforced error that this government has made. It's not to say that there isn't a case for means testing the payment to pensioners, but actually, as I said, I think it was in the last episode, if you were going to do this, you should announce it in the budget when everybody can see everything else you're doing so that it looks like part of a strategy. At the time, this looked like a panicked decision. And since then, I've just had a whole number of what I regard as slightly surreal conversations with senior members of the government about why they did it. And one of the themes that they keep coming back to with me is that the Treasury said to them that if they didn't do this cut, it would lead to a trust moment, that the City of London investors would turn against them, that gilt prices would fall, that sterling would fall. And there are only two possible explanations. One is they're making it up, which I don't think they are. I think they genuinely think this is what some people in the Treasury said. If people in the Treasury said this, then this is frankly not the institution that it once was. It obviously doesn't have the market intelligence that it once had because, I spend quite a lot of time talking to people in the city, and I've talked to people, people controlling really huge sums of money, billions and billions, about this. And when I say to them, would there have been a market reaction if Labour hadn't done this? They genuinely laugh. I mean, they think it's a nonsense. So, maybe the Treasury did say it. As I say, if they did, the Treasury's taken leave of its senses, or they had some ulterior motive, like they wanted to bully the government into doing this. I mean, I should be clear, the Treasury has wanted to scrap this universal entitlement for years. They think it's a bad use of money. They think means testing is a much better approach. Yeah. So it's possible that they tried to pull the wool over the eyes of the Chancellor, or maybe there was just a misunderstanding, except... And this is the bit where I literally thought the world's gone mad. So I see another senior Labour person yesterday who says that he's been told, and this is somebody I've known for years and I trust, he's been told that Rachel Reeves was advised by the governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, that they would put interest rates up if they didn't.
What?
I know. I mean, obviously it's mad.
This
is doing the rounds as a story that somehow Rachel Reeves was warned that if they didn't cut the universal entitlement to the fuel payment, that Bank of England would put up interest rates. Mad. It obviously didn't happen, but it sort of shows you, I suppose, to an extent, how bad the government feels about this, because literally every Labour MP thinks this was a mistake. The only reason they've voted for it is because they don't want to undermine the authority of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves early in the Parliament.
So it's got through by default then?
It's got through because a decision that didn't have to be taken was taken for pragmatic reasons. That Rachel Reeves wanted to show that she was tough. She wasn't just about giving money away, that she could also take money away. She felt a good look. But it's massively backfired. As I say, almost nobody you speak to thinks the timing of the announcement was the right one to do, but the right timing. But the problem is, when you get the world turning against you on these issues so early in the lifetime of a government, what becomes a sort of pragmatic decision then becomes an issue of principle, because what's on the line is the competence and the authority of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. So at that point, they have to build this whole narrative that somehow this showed their intent to make unpopular decisions for the good of the country. And so they obviously just they could not afford to lose the vote at this juncture.
Is it not one of those things, though, where in a few months we'll all have just forgotten about it anyway, because, we'll have moved on to the budget and hearing a lot more about, all the different plans for that none of this will even matter in a few months?
I think you're correct that the scale of the challenge that the government faces to invest enough in public services to kickstart the economy, to fill the so-called 22 billion black hole. Just to remind people, some of that was overspending on the Rwanda plan and Home Office staff, and 9 billion of it was the decision to give people in public services the above inflation pay rise that was recommended by the pay review bodies. Now, filling the assorted holes, and we'll see both some squeezes of some public spending, but more importantly, we're going to see very big tax rises in the budget. Yes, of course, when we've got all that, this will not have the status that it has now. But for the very first action that the government takes that directly affects the living standards of ordinary people to be something that undoubtedly will take money away from some vulnerable people, because, there will be some people who are entitled to pension credit who won't claim for it, and there'll be some people who are just above the level of entitlement who will struggle to heat their homes. It's a really bad look for a government as their first, as I say, initiative that has a direct impact on people's living standards when it wasn't necessary. That's the point.
Yeah.
Okay. If it was absolutely essential to keep the show on the road economically, of course.
And the thing about the problem with energy and the cost of energy, it's about the energy companies more than anything. You feel it would be more impressive and carry more weight if it would have been something that the energy companies were going to have to pay, rather than it hitting, pensioners and them having to lose this money.
So why haven't they moved faster, for example, to introduce a really effective so-called social tariff? I mean, this is something that has been debated for ages, which is the notion that if you are somebody on a lower income, there should be a tariff structure which essentially compels energy companies to charge you way less for energy.
Yeah.
So why haven't we moved faster towards that kind of structure, which would to an extent offset the cost to these vulnerable people? I think there's one other point which also slightly depresses me, really, which is there's been a very explicit attempt by the government to say, but look, we are committed to the so-called triple lock on the state pension. We saw earlier this week, figures from the ONS which showed that wages in the economy, including bonuses, are going up at a rate of 4% per annum. That is significantly higher than the rate of inflation. And that 4% will be the benchmark now for pushing up the basic state pension. The problem is, and so the government is saying, look, they're going to get 460 extra quid, or every pensioner, through the basic state pension as a result of this triple lock. The problem is they don't get that money till April. When actually the weather will be getting warmer, and it's before April that the cost of paying to heat your home will be most acute. So April's too late to solve this problem.
And do you know what's really interesting, what you were talking about there, is the number of people who qualify for benefits who, for whatever reason, don't claim them. Because I know when I was doing my show, we used to do a lot around that, because that kind of stigma around getting handouts or the complicated nature of it, or simply privacy, people not wanting to be giving all their financial details to the government for whatever reason, they don't trust them. And yet at the same time, the figures from like the Department of Work and Pensions show that almost 1 in 5 households are in absolute poverty once you include housing costs and things. So there is people out there who, as you say, this money is so vital to them because they're not getting the help they need, which could cost the government more in other problems to do with health and well-being and everything else.
So there are two other aspects of that which I just want to pick up on. I mean, one is the government has started a quite sort of aggressive campaign to persuade those pensioners on lower incomes to claim pension credit if they are not.
Yeah.
And anyway, all the publicity that, news organisations like mine at ITV are giving to this issue means that people are acutely aware both that they're losing the 200 to 300 quid and that they may be entitled to pension credit and therefore be able to get the payment back again. And the numbers of people, there was data out, a day or so ago that the number of people in the last few weeks who've been claiming it has doubled, right? It's still only a few tens of thousands, right?
Yeah.
It's not the millions who are losing it, but a few tens of thousands more are now applying. But here's the thing that's shocking. When you go onto the website and you apply, they say they will get back to you in approximately 9 weeks, right? So even if you apply now, you're not going to know whether you're entitled to pension credit till the weather is a hell of a lot colder. You can't get the winter fuel payment until you qualify for pension credit. So again, it's altogether plausible that there'll be really, really bad hardship until people know, whether or not they're getting this extra income. And here's the final thing, right, which is also mad. If the government were successful in persuading every pensioner who is entitled to pension credit to actually take it up, it is actually almost certainly the case that they would end up paying more money than they're saving through abolishing the universal entitled. I mean, now, I don't think, unfortunately, every pensioner who's entitled to pension credit will, for all sorts of reasons, take it up, which is sad. But if they did, this policy would end up costing the government.
Yeah, because the figures on that, we said this policy would save 1.4 billion. But as you say, if everyone claimed the pension credit who's eligible, that's something like 1.6, 1.7 billion. So, yeah, swings and roundabouts. Right, should we take on some of these questions then that we've been sent by our listeners?
And there is actually a connected one. So do you want to take us into that?
So this is Georgina Jones who's saying, what is the economic case for the social care cap? I understand that people who have assets want to pass on their wealth to their children, but I don't understand why working people should have a higher tax burden in order to fund it. So what Georgina's talking about here was a plan Boris Johnson had to bring in a social care cap, which would limit the amount of money you spend on care for yourself. So the idea being that from October 2025, you'd never pay more than 86 grand for your care for an individual. If your care was going to cost more than that for whatever reason, if you're in a care home or whatever, the government would pick up the rest. So that was the plan, with the idea being it would create a fairer system for social care. However, Rachel Reeves has announced she's scrapping it.
She has, and it was again a reaction to the so-called 22 billion black hole, which we've already talked about. It was another chunk of money that she felt she needed to save. Only $1 billion a year, right? I mean, it really wasn't an enormous sum of money. It's even less than she was saving from scrapping the winter fuel payment. And in a way, if I'm honest with you, I think this is even more, some would say depressing, right?
Yeah.
Than scrapping the winter fuel cap. And the reason I say this is because, we do have a really unfair system when it comes to providing for the care of elderly people in this country and the care of infirm people. And, almost as long as I've been sort of conscious of big economic and political issues, reforming the social care system has been something that almost every government I can think of has promised, but never delivered. I mean, there was quite a distinguished economist called Andrew Dilnot who did a big report on this so many years ago that I think David Cameron's government said it was going to implement and never did. Boris Johnson comes in, he talks about reforming social care. He introduces this proposed cap. And again, this government has now scrapped it. And this is a government, to be clear, that has said it's a massive priority to make sure that those people who become infirm as they get older are properly looked after. They have talked about giving the care service, the social care service, the status of the NHS. But their first action is to do something which many would say is absolutely the reverse of that. And so just to be clear, simply introducing a cap doesn't fix everything, but there are the two things many would say need to happen to give decent social care provision. One is this cap, and we'll talk about why it's necessary. And then you've just got to put way, way, way more money into both at-home care and residential care.
And earlier intervention to stop some of the chronic illnesses and diseases that put people into needing care as well. The thing that strikes me in this, though, is this is the topic that I would say people out there often talk about the most when they're deciding what to do with the houses that they've bought, when they've paid off their mortgages, about whether they're going to pass them on to their family and try and, avoid inheritance tax and also not have all this money and wealth that will then just get eaten up by care. Like, it is the most common thing that I end up talking to my family about, where they're saying, you're told to save and do well in your life. You're told to buy your own house, to have your own home and all of that. And then all of a sudden, when you need care, you lose it all to pay for your care. Yet someone who hasn't necessarily saved, who, maybe they might not have been able to afford to or whatever else, but some people will not have done as well and will not own their own home, and they don't have to pay for their care. The government picks up the bill. And that's the thing that I think really annoys people, because that feels really unfair, doesn't it? And so you would think this cap, I can see as something that you would, normal families would say, yes, that's great. It doesn't mean I'm going to lose everything if I need to go into a home. So to answer Georgina's question now, like, what is the economic case for it? Because certainly from a voting perspective or from a fairness in the system, it does feel like it's the right thing to have a cap so you don't lose everything, having worked hard all your life to own your own home, to then for it all to go into paying for your care when other people are just getting it for free.
So I think balancing the sort of social justice of this is complicated. And, as you say, if you are on a low income, then the state is obliged to pick up the cost of your care. And as you say, particularly many middle-class people who own their own homes do get terrified.
Don't even know if it's middle class, though. It's also working class people who've bought their own home and got there in the end. They might not be middle class, like, for example, my mum and dad's working in a hospital. And
okay, we're into that philosophical discussion about
fair enough. We won't go into that.
Once you own your own home, you are technically middle class. We can have that conversation another time. And just to go directly to your point about the extent to which people care about this, you will remember that in 2017, Theresa May, when she called that general election she didn't have to call, one of the reasons why she ended up losing her majority was because she did announce what was regarded at the time as a death tax, which was a policy that actually would have increased for some people the amount they would have to pay for their own care.
Yeah.
And it was amazingly politically unpopular. And she had to do a U-turn and actually take it out of her manifesto. And it was a real furore at the time, which cost her, some would say, her ability to get what she really wanted, which was an outright majority. She had a majority when she went into the election. At the end of it, it was basically a hung parliament. She didn't have a working majority. She had to do that deal with the unionists. Now, the easiest way, I think, of sort of answering Georgina's question about what, wouldn't it be fairer if all rich people paid out every penny of what they've accumulated in savings to pay for their own care, which is basically what she's saying. I mean, the reason why I think most people would say, actually, that's not necessarily the right approach is because illness is a lottery to an extent. Yes, we could all take steps to keep ourselves healthier, but, is it really the case that we want two identical families, individuals in the same jobs all their lives, living sort of side by side in their, the same homes. One of them gets ill and loses everything, and the other one is lucky enough not to get ill and is able to pass on, their what they've accumulated to their children. Do we actually think that's fair, or do we think that actually there is a role for the state to sort of, in a sense, cushion the lottery element of life? And
you can't ever lose that, though. That lottery's going to...
No, there's always a bit of lottery in life, of course. But I think surely the role of a benign state is to protect people from the most extreme worst outcomes of that lottery. And the other point about it is, if you know that when you get ill, there is a certain maximum limit to what you will have to pay for your care, then you can save for it.
Yes, totally.
Right?
It's less scary because it's the unknown. I've got so many friends.
Right.
One of my friends whose mum's in a care home now, she is really struggling to know where the money is going to come from to pay for it. They've already they've sold the mum's house. Now that's all that money's gone. And now they're like, God, because it's thousands of pounds a week we're talking about here. And people don't have that kind of money, do they? So it would take away the uncertainty and the worry and the fear.
And insurance companies could design insurance products they could sell to you. So from all points of view, whether you believe both in the operation of the state and the operation of the markets, right, having a policy of this sort actually would, in the end, I think, provide much greater security to people, which is important.
I'm amazed that it only saves £1 billion a year as well, because you would think it would save way more money than that. Whenever I think about the cost of care, I assume it must be in the billions, but 1 billion doesn't feel like a lot.
Yeah, and it's complicated how they arrived at that billion anyway, because a lot of that billion is actually the administration costs of just setting up the new system.
Oh, right.
It's not even the sort of just the net cost of limiting what individuals spend. It's just that they were struggling. This is a perennial failure of the British state, of British governments. They were just struggling to put in place the new arrangements, which are complex.